Joran had always prided himself on being a problem solver. He worked as an engineer aboard the massive starship Zenith, a diplomatic space station orbiting the planet Rykor. It was a routine job, maintaining the systems that kept the station running smoothly. But on this particular day, something had gone wrong. Very wrong. It started with a routine check of the ventilation shafts. The air in the lower levels had been a little off lately, and as part of his work, Joran had to investigate. He climbed into the small, cramped crawl space, flashlight in hand, as he navigated through the dark and narrow passageways. Everything was normal until he made a wrong turn. An easy mistake in such a maze of tunnels. One wrong turn led him to a new section of the station, one he didn't recognize. The walls were smoother here, the lighting dimmer, and the air felt heavier. The strange thing was, Joran didn't even know this part of the station existed. He had explored the Zenith top to bottom, but this area was not on any of the blueprints. His heart started to race, but he brushed the feeling aside. Maybe it was an old, forgotten part of the station, or perhaps a section meant for high-ranking officers. Joran tried to turn back, but the vent he came through was no longer there. Instead, the path ahead seemed to stretch on, dark and silent. He pulled out his communicator to call for help, but it was dead. No signal. Panic started to build in his chest, but he forced it down. He had faced worse situations on deep space missions. This would just be another mystery to solve. He continued walking, hoping to find an exit or some clue as to where he was. The further he went, the stranger the environment became. The air began to hum, like some unseen machine was powering up in the distance. The walls, once metallic and plain, started to shimmer with strange symbols and glowing lines. It was as if the very structure of the station was alive. Then it happened. Without warning, Joran's foot caught on something invisible. He stumbled, arms flailing, and crashed to the ground. The sound of his fall echoed through the tunnel, but before he could get back up, a strange force pushed him sideways. The walls around him seemed to warp and bend, and he felt himself being pulled into a vortex of light and shadow. Joran gasped. His head spun as the strange energy around him intensified. He tried to regain his balance, but his body was weightless, like he was floating in space. With a sudden jolt, everything stopped, and he landed hard on the floor. The sudden impact knocked the wind out of him, but he managed to sit up and blink his eyes open. He found himself in a completely different place. It was vast, too vast for the size of the station. He was in a grand room, the walls made of smooth, iridescent stone that seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. Strange symbols were etched into the surfaces, and the air smelled faintly of something floral and rich, unlike the sterile mechanical scent of the rest of the station. Joran's breath caught in his throat. This was no ordinary part of the station. He didn't know where he was, but it was not a place meant for humans. The furniture in the room was unfamiliar, too. Large, curved objects that resembled thrones were scattered around. On the far side of the room stood a massive set of doors. Doors that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Before Joran could take it all in, a sound broke the silence. A low hum, almost like a purring, filled the room. He turned, his heart pounding in his chest. Standing at the far end of the room, watching him with piercing golden eyes, was a figure. A woman, but not like any human woman he had ever seen. She stood tall, her skin a shade of purple that shimmered under the light. Her 4 eyes glowed faintly, 2 on each side of her face. Her features were sharp and regal, her body adorned with intricate armor made of metal and glowing patterns. A long, flowing cloak draped behind her, its edges catching the light like liquid silver. Joran froze, unable to speak. His mind raced to make sense of the situation. Who was this woman? Where was he? And how did he get here? The woman took a step forward, her movements graceful and deliberate. "I see you are confused," she said, her voice calm but filled with authority. It wasn't the language Joran was used to hearing, yet somehow he understood every word. "Where am I?" Joran managed to ask. his voice shaky. "You are in my chamber," she replied simply, her golden eyes scanning him with an unreadable expression. "You should not be here." Joran's mind raced. What was going on? How had he ended up in the bedroom of an alien queen? His thoughts were interrupted as the strange woman took another step closer, her presence overwhelming. He couldn't look away, as if he were drawn to her. She tilted her head, studying him curiously. "You do not fear me," she observed, her voice tinged with both surprise and intrigue. Joran swallowed hard. The truth was, he didn't feel afraid, not in the way he should have. In the presence of this powerful alien being, there was only awe and confusion. But fear? No, he didn't feel that. The woman's lips curled into a faint smile. "That is interesting," she murmured. "Very interesting." And with that, Joran's accidental journey into the unknown had begun. Joran stood frozen, his mind struggling to keep up with what had just happened. One moment, he was crawling through a maintenance shaft. The next, he was standing in an enormous alien chamber, face to face with a tall, regal-looking woman with 4 glowing golden eyes. Her presence was overwhelming. The way she stood, the way she spoke, it was clear she was someone important. Her shimmering armor, the intricate designs on her long, flowing cloak, and the sheer confidence in her expression told Joran that he was in trouble. This was no ordinary person. This was the queen of an alien race. Joran swallowed hard. He had read about the Sci-Fi Dominion, one of the most powerful alien empires in the galaxy. Their queen, Silara, was known to be both wise and ruthless. Diplomats spoke her name with respect and fear. And now, somehow, he had accidentally landed inside her private chamber. "This is a restricted area," Queen Silara said, her voice calm but firm. "No one enters uninvited." Joran knew he had to say something, anything, before she decided to call the guards. He raised his hand slightly, trying to show he wasn't a threat. I didn't mean to come here," he said quickly. "There was a problem with the ventilation system. I got lost. Then something pulled me here, and—" He stopped, realizing how ridiculous it all sounded. How could he explain that he fell into the queen's bedroom? Would she even believe him? Silara's 4 eyes studied him carefully, her expression unreadable. She took a slow step forward, and Joran had to fight the urge to back away. There was something strange about her gaze. It wasn't just curiosity, it was interest. "You are human," she stated. Joran nodded. "Yeah." She tilted her head slightly, as if thinking about something. The room was eerily silent, except for the soft hum of the strange energy pulsing through the walls. "How did you enter?" she asked. "There are security barriers around my chamber. No being, no matter how skilled, has ever bypassed them." Joran frowned. I don't know. One moment, I was falling, and then I was here." Her expression remained unreadable, but her golden eyes flickered slightly. She waved her hand, and suddenly, the air around Joran shimmered. A faint blue glow surrounded him for a brief moment before vanishing. Silara's brow furrowed. "Strange," she murmured. "The barrier recognized you as if you were meant to be here." Joran had no idea what that meant, but he knew one thing. He was in deep trouble. If the queen thought he was some kind of spy, things could go very badly for him. "I swear, I didn't mean to come here," Joran said. "I'm just an engineer. I fix things. That's all." Silara's lips curled slightly, almost as if she was amused. "An engineer," she repeated. "And yet, you have done something impossible." Joran didn't know what to say to that. He was just as confused as she was. Suddenly, there was a sound outside the chamber. Footsteps. The heavy march of armored soldiers. Joran tensed. Guards. Silara glanced toward the door, but did not seem alarmed. She turned back to Joran, her eyes narrowing slightly. "If my guards see you here, they will assume you are an intruder," she said, "and they will not ask questions before acting." Joran's stomach twisted. He had no doubt what she meant. The Xyrath were known for their strict rules, especially when it came to their queen's safety. If the guards found a human inside her chamber, they would not hesitate. Joran took a deep breath. Then, what do we do? Silara seemed to consider something for a moment. Then, to Joran's shock, she lifted her hand and touched a small panel on the wall. The shimmering air around him shifted again, and suddenly he felt a strange warmth surrounding him. Joran looked down at himself. His skin seemed to glow for a brief moment before returning to normal. He felt different, but he couldn't explain how. "What did you do?" he asked. Silara's lips curved into the faintest smile. "I have masked your presence," she said. "For now, the guards will not see you unless I allow it." Joran blinked. "Wait, so I'm invisible?" "Not invisible," Silara corrected. "Simply unnoticed." The heavy footsteps outside the door grew louder, then stopped. A deep voice spoke from the other side. "My queen, we heard a disturbance. Is everything well?" Joran held his breath. This was it. If the queen gave him up, it was all over. Silara turned toward the door, her expression completely calm. "There is no disturbance," she said smoothly. "Return to your posts." There was a brief pause. Then the footsteps retreated, growing fainter until they disappeared. Joran let out a slow breath of relief. He looked at Silara, still unsure why she had helped him. "Why? Why did you do that?" he asked. Silara took a step closer, her golden eyes studying him carefully. "Because you intrigue me, human," she said softly. "And I do not believe in coincidences." Joran wasn't sure what that meant, but he had a feeling his life had just changed forever. And whatever was happening, it was only the beginning. Joran stood motionless, his mind racing. The queen of the Xyrath Dominion had just saved him. Instead of calling the guards, she had hidden him. Why? Queen Silara gazed at him with her 4 golden eyes, a mysterious expression on her face. Joran didn't know much about alien royalty, but he was sure of one thing. This was not normal. "You are still standing in my private chamber, human," she said, her voice smooth but firm. "That is dangerous." Joran swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to come here," he said. "I don't even know how I got in." Silara studied him, as if trying to see through his words. "The security barriers should have erased you the moment you crossed them," she said. "Yet, they did not. They let you in." Joran felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't sure what was worse, being in the queen's room by accident, or the fact that some advanced alien security system had let him in when it shouldn't have. "I don't know why," he admitted. "Maybe it's broken." Silara's lips curled slightly, almost in amusement. "No," she said. "It is not broken." She lifted her hand and pressed it against the smooth wall. Glowing symbols appeared beneath her fingertips, shifting and rearranging like living light. A moment later, the air around Joran shimmered again. He felt a strange tingling sensation in his skin, as if unseen energy was scanning him. Silara watched the symbols carefully, her expression unreadable. When the light faded, she let out a soft breath. "Impossible," she murmured. Joran tensed. "What?" Silara turned to face him fully. "The barrier does not recognize you as an intruder," she said. "It recognized you as someone permitted." Joran frowned. "But that doesn't make sense. I've never been here before." Silara was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke in a lower voice, almost to herself. "Unless." Joran waited, but she didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she stepped closer, looking at him with a strange intensity. "Tell me, human, has anything unusual happened to you before this?" Joran blinked. "Unusual?" He thought for a moment. "Not really. I mean, I work on a space station. Strange things happen all the time, but nothing like this." Silara narrowed her eyes. "You are certain?" Joran hesitated. There was one thing, but it had never seemed important. "Well, When I first joined the station, there was this weird test they did. Some kind of DNA scan. The results took longer than usual, and they had to redo it. Silara's expression darkened slightly. And they said it was just an error, Joran said. Something about my genetic markers being hard to read. But they cleared me, so I didn't think much of it. Silara was quiet again. Then she turned away, deep in thought. Joran shifted uncomfortably. What does that have to do with this? The queen turned back to him, her golden eyes gleaming. I am not certain yet, she said, but I have a theory. Joran wasn't sure he liked the sound of that. A theory about what? Zilara walked toward the far end of the chamber, where a large floating structure pulsed with energy. It looked almost like a throne, but with strange, swirling patterns that moved across its surface like liquid metal. She placed a hand on it, and the symbols around the room shifted again. A moment later, a massive star map appeared in the air before them. It showed an intricate network of galaxies, with bright markers highlighting certain locations. Joran stared in amazement. What is this? Silara's voice was calm but serious. A map of lost knowledge, she said. For centuries, my people have searched for something ancient and powerful. It is hidden within a vault that no being has ever been able to open. Joran frowned. And what does that have to do with me? Silara turned to him, her gaze sharp. Because, human, she said, you walked through my security as if it did not exist. And if my theory is correct, you may be able to do the same for the vault. Joran's heart pounded. Wait, you think I can open this ancient thing? Silara nodded. Yes, and if I am right, then you are more important than you realize. Joran exhaled slowly. A few hours ago, he had been fixing air filters. Now he was standing in the chamber of an alien queen, being told he might be the key to unlocking something no one else could. He rubbed the back of his neck. This is a lot. Silara gave a small, knowing smile. It is only the beginning. Joran sighed. He had a feeling this wasn't going to be a simple misunderstanding after all. And deep down, he knew his life was never going to be the same again. Joran stood in the center of the strange, glowing chamber, his mind swirling with thoughts. One moment, he was just an engineer, checking on ventilation systems in the Zenith's lower levels. Now, he was at the heart of an alien queen's private space, learning that he might hold the key to an ancient mystery that had baffled the Sci-Fi Dominion for centuries. Queen Silara's words echoed in his head. You may be able to open the vault. Joran looked at the star map floating before him. Thousands of stars were marked, connected by lines that led to one central location deep in the heart of the galaxy. At the center of it all was an enormous, pulsing dot, surrounded by swirling symbols and patterns. That's the vault, Joran asked, pointing at the central location. Silara nodded. Yes, it is said to be the resting place of an artifact so powerful that whoever possesses it can shape the very fabric of the universe. Joran blinked. Wait, what? Shake the universe? The queen's golden eyes met his, their gaze unblinking. That is what the ancient texts say. But no one has ever been able to confirm its existence, until now. Joran's mind raced. A powerful artifact that could control the universe. This was far beyond anything he had ever imagined. He had never been involved in something so dangerous, so beyond his control. He just wanted to go back to his normal life. But the reality of his situation hit him like a cold wave. The fact that he was standing here, in front of the Queen of the Sci-Fi Dominion, meant there was no going back. He was already in too deep. So, you think I can open this vault because I walked through your security? He asked, still trying to make sense of it all. Silara looked at him thoughtfully. Yes, it is more than just a physical barrier. The vault is sealed by a unique lock, one that responds only to specific energy signatures, ones that are very rare. It is a lock no one has ever been able to decode. But when you entered this chamber, the security did not stop you. It accepted you. Joran shook his head, trying to process what she was saying. But I'm just a regular engineer. I don't have any special powers or anything. Zilara smiled faintly, her 4 golden eyes narrowing in a way that made Joran feel like she could see right through him. You may not know it, but you have a unique connection to this lock. I believe your presence here, in this moment, is no accident. You are linked to the vault in a way that even you do not understand. Joran felt a cold shiver run down his spine. How could she be so certain? He was just a normal human from a normal space station. He didn't feel special. He felt more confused than anything. Wait, he said, a thought suddenly occurring to him. You said something about ancient texts. How do you know all this? Silara's expression shifted slightly, and for the first time, there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. The Xayarath Dominion has been searching for this vault for centuries. It is part of our history, our legacy. We know it exists, but we cannot open it. We have tried everything, but it remains sealed. Our best scientists, our most powerful leaders, none of them could do what you did. Until now. Joran felt the weight of her words. This wasn't just some random treasure hunt. It was a matter of deep importance to her people, to the very future of the Xayarath Dominion. Zilara took a step closer to him, her gaze never leaving his. If you can help me open the vault, you will be more than just a tool to us, human. You will be a key player in a future far greater than you can imagine. Joran swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this. He wasn't even sure he wanted to be involved in something this big. But one look at Silara's intense gaze told him that this wasn't something he could easily walk away from. I don't know, he said slowly. I'm not some hero. I'm just trying to get back to my normal life. Silara's expression softened for a moment, and she reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was surprisingly gentle, but it carried an undeniable weight of responsibility. I understand, she said quietly, but sometimes fate does not give us a choice. It places us in situations we do not seek, and we must choose how to act when the time comes. Joran looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. This was more than just a job. This was bigger than anything he had ever faced. He was standing at the edge of something dangerous, something beyond his control. I'll help, he said, the words escaping his lips before he could fully think through the consequences. But I don't know how. I don't know anything about this vault, or whatever power it holds. Zilara gave him a small, knowing smile. You may not know it now, but you will learn soon enough. And when you do, you will understand why you were brought here. She turned back to the star map, her eyes narrowing as she traced a line leading to the vault's location. The vault is not just a structure, it is a living thing. It reacts to those who approach it, tests them, challenges them. I believe you will be tested as well. Only those who are truly worthy can open it. Joran felt a chill in the air. Worthy? What do you mean by that? Zilara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned and walked toward the far side of the room, where a sleek, glowing console flickered to life. She pressed a series of buttons, and a new set of symbols appeared on the screen. This, she said, is where we begin. If we are to reach the vault, we must first understand its trials. Joran nodded, though he had no idea what that meant. But one thing was certain, he was no longer just a simple engineer. His life was now tied to something much greater, something that could change the course of the universe itself. And there was no turning back. Joran's mind was still spinning. The Queen's words, "You are the key," echoed in his head. He had agreed to help Zilara open the vault, but what did that really mean? What kind of trials were ahead of him? And more importantly, why him? As he stood there, his thoughts were interrupted by a sudden shift in the room. The soft hum of energy grew louder, and the glowing symbols around the chamber began to move, like ripples on the surface of a calm lake. Zilara looked at him, her golden eyes steady. "We must begin," she said, her voice calm but urgent. Joran nodded, though his heart was racing. He had no idea what to expect. Silara stepped toward the floating console, her fingers brushing over the glowing surface. The air around them crackled with energy, and the star map in front of them began to zoom in, focusing on the location of the vault. "This," Silara said, "is where the first trial begins." The image of the vault shifted. The swirling patterns around it seemed to stretch and twist, revealing a jagged, dark path leading to its center. The path was surrounded by a dense, swirling mist, and the walls seemed to pulse with a strange, ominous energy. Joran frowned. "What's that?" Silara's gaze was intense, focused. "The vault is not simply a physical structure. It is a test, a challenge. Each trial will be different, but all will require strength, courage, and intelligence. The first trial begins now." Suddenly, the room seemed to fade away. The walls, the console, the star map, they all disappeared, leaving Joran standing in the middle of a thick, swirling mist. The air was cold and damp, and the only sound was the quiet rustling of the mist itself. He blinked, trying to make sense of his surroundings. The mist was so thick that he could barely see his own hands in front of him. His breath fogged in the air. A voice echoed through the mist, low, deep, and commanding. "Welcome to the first trial." Joran's heart skipped a beat. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. He couldn't see anything, but he felt as if something was watching him, judging him. The voice continued, "To pass this trial, you must overcome your greatest fear. Only by confronting it can you continue. Fail, and you will never leave this place." Joran's stomach twisted. Confront his greatest fear. That was easier said than done. He had never been one to back down from challenges, but fear was something else entirely. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The mist around him swirled, and for a moment, the air felt heavy, suffocating. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something, a shadow, barely visible through the mist. It moved quickly, darting in and out of sight. Joran stiffened. His heart raced, and a cold sweat began to form on his forehead. He knew what this was. A memory flooded his mind, one he had buried deep within him. A memory he had long since tried to forget. It was the day of the accident. He had been working in one of the lower levels of the space station when a sudden explosion had rocked the area. Joran had been trapped, unable to escape the rising flames and thick smoke. His heart had pounded as he fought for air, his vision blurring as the heat intensified. And then there had been the screams, the desperate, terrified screams of his coworkers, trapped just as he was. But Joran had been too afraid to help. He had frozen, unable to move, paralyzed by fear. He could still hear their cries in his mind. The guilt had haunted him for weeks, months even. Joran felt a wave of panic rise within him as the mist thickened, wrapping around him like a suffocating cloak. The shadow moved again, closer this time, and Joran could almost feel its breath on his neck. "No," he thought, "I can't let this control me." He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. He couldn't let his past haunt him forever. He had to face this. The shadow loomed closer, its form beginning to take shape. It was the face of his fear, his own failure, the people he hadn't been able to save, the guilt that had never gone away. But Joran didn't flinch. He stepped forward, breathing through the fear, focusing on the present. He didn't have to let this memory control him anymore. With a shout, he reached out, pushing the shadow away. The mist around him began to dissolve, and the shadow vanished, replaced by a sudden clarity. He was no longer trapped in that moment of weakness. The voice echoed again, this time softer, almost approving. "You have faced your fear and conquered it. The first trial is complete." Joran exhaled deeply, his body trembling slightly as the mist faded away. He was back in the chamber with Silara, who was watching him intently. "Well done," she said, her voice steady but filled with a hint of respect. "You have passed the first trial." Joran wiped the sweat from his brow, still catching his breath. "I didn't think I could do it," he admitted. Silara's eyes softened just a little. That is why the trial exists, to show you that you are capable of far more than you think. Joran nodded slowly, his mind still racing. The first trial had been terrifying, but he had faced it. He had confronted his fear, and now he was one step closer to the vault. But the path ahead would only grow more difficult, and there were still many trials to come. Joran was still catching his breath after the first trial. His heart was still racing, and his mind felt exhausted. Confronting his greatest fear had taken everything he had, but somehow he had done it. And now, standing in the chamber with Queen Silara, he couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and anxiety. "Congratulations on passing the first trial," Silara said, her voice calm, though there was a flicker of something like approval in her golden eyes. Joran managed a small smile. "Thanks, but I don't know how much more of this I can handle." He looked around the room, suddenly feeling the weight of what lay ahead. "What's next? I'm not sure I'm ready for another one." Silara's gaze softened. "You are stronger than you realize, Joran. The trials are not meant to break you. They are meant to test you, to reveal the parts of yourself that you might not see." Joran nodded slowly, still processing her words. But before he could say anything more, the air around him seemed to shift again. The glowing symbols on the walls began to swirl faster, and the ground beneath him seemed to vibrate, like something was moving just below the surface. "The second trial begins now," Silara's voice rang out, clear and commanding. Joran tensed. He had just gotten through the first one. How much harder could it get? The world around him seemed to distort, and in the blink of an eye, everything changed. The chamber disappeared, replaced by a vast, empty landscape. The sky was a dull gray, and the ground beneath his feet was cracked and dry. It looked like a wasteland, bare, desolate, and empty. Joran took a step forward, his boots crunching on the dry earth. He felt a strange sense of unease, like he was being watched. But when he looked around, there was no one in sight, just the endless stretch of barren land. Suddenly, the voice echoed through the empty space again, deep and resonant. "Welcome to the second trial." Joran looked around, trying to spot where the voice was coming from. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice echoing strangely in the empty expanse. "You are in the trial of the lost," the voice replied. "To pass, you must find what you have lost, what you have given up. If you fail, you will remain here forever." Joran's stomach twisted. What he had lost. What did that even mean? He had already faced his fear. What could be worse than that? The ground beneath him suddenly trembled, and a deep guttural growl filled the air. Joran's heart skipped a beat as he turned to see something moving in the distance. It was large, massive, and as it drew closer, he could see its shape more clearly. A creature covered in spiked armor, with glowing red eyes that seemed to burn with a fierce intensity. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its massive claws scraped the ground as it moved, and it growled again, sending a chill down Joran's spine. Without thinking, Joran instinctively took a step back. His mind was racing. He had no weapons, no way to defend himself. The creature paused, its eyes locking onto him. It seemed to be studying him, as if it could sense his fear. Then, to Joran's surprise, it didn't attack. Instead, it let out a low, mournful howl and slowly backed away, disappearing into the distance. Joran blinked, confused. What just happened? The voice returned. "You have been given a choice. The creature you faced was a representation of your past, of things you regret. You must now decide. Will you continue forward, or will you allow your past to consume you?" Joran stood there, stunned. His past. What did that mean? Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of him, just a few feet away. It was a woman, dressed in the same engineer uniform that Joran had worn years ago when he was on the space station. She looked just like someone he had worked with, one of the people who had died in the explosion. Her face was pale, her eyes empty. She stared at him, her expression haunting. Joran felt his breath catch in his throat. The guilt hit him all over again. This was his fault. She had died because he had frozen, too scared to act. You're not real, Joran whispered, his voice trembling. The woman didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at him with those hollow eyes. Joran could feel his heart breaking all over again. He stepped forward, his hands shaking. I'm sorry. I should have done something. I should have saved you. The woman's face remained blank, offering no forgiveness. Joran took a deep breath, closing his eyes. He couldn't change what had happened. No matter how much he wished he couldn't undo the past. But he could move forward. I can't keep living with this guilt, he said softly, his voice steadying. I can't let it control me anymore. The moment he spoke, the figure disappeared. The landscape shifted again, and the gray sky began to lighten. The dry, cracked earth slowly began to bloom, and small flowers began to appear, growing where the land had once been barren. The voice returned, this time softer. You have passed the second trial. You have faced your regrets and let them go. Joran stood still for a moment, his heart still racing. The landscape was no longer desolate. It was peaceful, quiet, but there was something different in him now. The weight of his guilt had lifted, just a little. You did well, Silara said, her voice breaking through his thoughts. He turned to see her standing behind him, her eyes filled with respect. Joran nodded slowly. I don't know how I did it, but I think I understand now. Silara smiled faintly. You are stronger than you realize, Joran. Now, only one trial remains. Joran took a deep breath. He had faced his fear, and he had confronted his past. But what else could be waiting for him in the final trial? Whatever it was, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to stop now. Joran stood at the edge of the newly transformed landscape, still catching his breath from the second trial. The pain of his past was no longer as heavy as it had been, but it hadn't disappeared entirely. He could still feel the weight of his regrets, the faces of those he couldn't save haunting his thoughts. However, he had learned something important. He didn't have to let his past define him. Queen Silara's presence was a calm constant behind him, her steady gaze never wavering. You have faced the trials well, Joran, she said, but the final trial will be the most difficult. Joran nodded. His body was sore, his mind tired, but he couldn't stop now. He had come too far. Whatever awaited him in the final trial, he was determined to face it. The landscape around him seemed to shimmer, and the sky darkened. The once peaceful setting shifted into something far more intimidating. The air grew cold, and the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. Silara stepped forward, her expression unreadable. This is the trial of the heart. To pass, you must make the hardest decision of your life. You will be tested not by your strength, your courage, or your intellect, but by your heart. What will you sacrifice for the greater good? Joran's pulse quickened. He had faced fears, regrets, and now, sacrifice. That was the last thing he wanted to think about. He had already lost so much. What else could he give? Before he could speak, the world around him shifted violently. The ground cracked, and jagged rocks rose from the earth. The air grew thick with tension, and Joran found himself standing alone in the middle of an unfamiliar place. It was an enormous cavern, its walls lined with strange glowing symbols. The air was heavy with an oppressive energy that made Joran feel small and insignificant. A single figure stood before him, tall, imposing, and cloaked in shadows. As it stepped forward, the shadows seemed to melt away, revealing a familiar face. It was Joran's own face, but twisted, darker. The figure spoke in a voice that was his, but not quite. You have come far, Joran, but you are not ready for the truth. Joran's heart skipped a beat. What truth? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. The figure smiled, and there was something cruel in the expression. The truth of who you truly are. You are not just an ordinary engineer. You were chosen for this path because you have the potential to do great things. But greatness comes with a price. Joran took a step back, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't real. This wasn't him. It couldn't be. The dark version of himself raised a hand, and the cavern around them seemed to ripple. You have already seen what your choices can lead to. You have faced your fears, and you have let go of your regrets. But the true test comes now. Will you embrace your power? Will you sacrifice everything for the greater good? Joran clenched his fists, confusion and fear swirling in his mind. I don't want power. I just want to survive. I want to help. The figure's smile widened, but it was not a friendly smile. Then you are weak. You are nothing. Power is what will save you. Power is what will give you the strength to make the hard choices. Joran felt a cold chill run down his spine. What do you mean? What kind of choices? The shadowed figure stepped closer, its presence overwhelming. The choice to lead. The choice to change the galaxy, to reshape it according to your will. The HFY Dominion, the vault, the artifact, it all exists for one reason. To bring about the change you were always meant to create. Joran's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't right. This couldn't be true. He had no desire for power. He had no desire to control anything. But as the figure spoke, Joran could feel the temptation growing deep inside him. What if he could be more than just a simple engineer? What if he could wield the power to fix everything, to make up for his failures? You will never be free, the dark version of Joran whispered. Not until you embrace who you truly are. You were never meant to be weak. Joran closed his eyes, trying to block out the voice, trying to fight the growing temptation. He had come this far, hadn't he? He had faced his fears, his regrets. He couldn't let this dark part of himself, take control now. Taking a deep breath, Joran opened his eyes. No, I won't become what you want me to be. I don't need power. I don't need to change everything. The shadowed version of Joran's face twisted in anger. Then you will fail. You will lose everything you've worked for. You will never open the vault, and your journey will be for nothing. Joran's heart was pounding, but he stood his ground. I won't be tempted by power. I won't sacrifice what makes me human. The figure let out a low, menacing laugh. We shall see. And then, with a burst of energy, the figure disappeared. The cavern began to shake, and the walls seemed to collapse around Joran. But instead of succumbing to the chaos, he felt a sense of clarity wash over him. He had made the right choice. The hardest choice, but the right one. The ground beneath him began to stabilize, and the air grew calm again. The glowing symbols on the walls faded, and the oppressive energy lifted. Joran stood in the center of the cavern, feeling the quiet strength rising within him. The trial was over. He had passed. From the shadows, Silara's voice came. You have chosen wisely, Joran. The final trial is complete. You have proven yourself worthy. Joran looked up at her, his heart still racing. He had faced the hardest challenge yet, but there was a sense of peace inside him now. No matter what came next, he had made the right choice. The vault awaits, Silara said. And now you will see its true power. Joran took a deep breath, ready for what was next. Whatever came, he was no longer afraid. He had faced his fears, his regrets, and his darkest self. And now he was ready for whatever lay beyond the vault. Joran stood before the great vault, his heart pounding in his chest. His body was exhausted, his mind weary from the trials he had faced. But as he looked up at the massive structure before him, a sense of determination and clarity filled him. He had made it through the trials, facing his fears, his regrets, and even the darkest parts of himself. Now, he was standing on the edge of something greater than anything he could have imagined. The vault loomed over him, its surface shimmering with strange, glowing symbols. It was a place of immense power, a relic from an ancient time that even the HFY Dominion did not fully understand. The doors were sealed tight, as though they were waiting for something. or someone. Tilara stepped forward, her golden eyes studying the vault. "You have come far, Joran," she said, her voice quiet but filled with awe. "But this is where the real challenge begins." Joran nodded, taking a deep breath. "What happens now?" Tilara turned toward him, her face serious. "The vault is not just a physical structure. It is a living, breathing thing. A manifestation of the Xtirath's knowledge and power. To unlock it, you must prove your worth in one final way." She paused, letting her words sink in. "It will not be easy. What lies inside is more than just a treasure. It is a key to something far greater. And only the one who is truly worthy can access it." Joran's mind raced. What could possibly be inside? A weapon? A tool of immense power? Something that could change the fate of the galaxy? He wasn't sure, but whatever it was, he had to face it. There was no turning back now. "How do I unlock it?" Joran asked, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Tilara's eyes softened. "The vault responds to your choices, Joran. You must choose what to give up to open it. Your past, your future, or something more precious. The vault will not open for someone who seeks to take without understanding what it truly costs." Joran felt a chill run through him. The weight of her words was heavy. He had already sacrificed so much. His past, his fears, and his regrets, they had all been laid bare. But now he had to make the ultimate decision. What would he give up to unlock the secrets of the vault? Tilara stepped aside, allowing him to approach the vault's massive doors. The symbols on the surface began to glow more brightly as he drew closer, responding to his presence. It was as if the vault was alive, aware of him. Joran placed his hand on the cool surface of the vault. The moment his fingers touched the door, a rush of energy surged through him. His mind was filled with flashes of images, strange worlds, ancient civilizations, and powerful forces beyond his understanding. For a brief moment, he felt as though he was losing himself in the flood of knowledge, but he fought to stay grounded. "Choose wisely," Tilara's voice echoed in his mind. Joran closed his eyes, focusing on the question. What was he willing to give up? The past. It had shaped him, haunted him, but it was no longer something he feared. The future. He couldn't control it, but he could shape it with his actions. So, what was left? Then, he realized, the only thing he hadn't fully embraced was himself. The man he had become after everything. The choices he had made, the people he had met, the lessons he had learned. He had spent so much time trying to live up to expectations, trying to undo his past mistakes. But the true choice was to accept who he was in the present, to embrace all the parts of himself, even the ones that made him imperfect. Joran took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment as the vault seemed to hum with anticipation. "I choose to give up my doubts," he whispered. "I choose to accept who I am now." The moment the words left his lips, the symbols on the vault's surface shifted, spinning and aligning in a pattern that was both beautiful and terrifying. A low, rumbling sound filled the air, and the doors of the vault began to slowly open. Joran stepped back, watching in awe as the doors parted. Inside, the vault was empty, at first glance. But as his eyes adjusted to the soft glow of the chamber, he saw something at the center. A pedestal, upon which rested a small, ancient-looking device. It seemed simple, but the energy emanating from it was undeniable. The device was unlike anything Joran had ever seen. A small sphere, glowing with a soft blue light. It pulsed, as if alive. "This," Tilara said, her voice filled with reverence, "is the heart of the Xtirath. It is the key to the galaxy's future, a source of unimaginable power. But its true power is not in what it can do, but in how it is used." Joran's eyes narrowed as he stepped forward, reaching out to touch the device. The moment his fingers brushed the surface of the sphere, a surge of energy rushed through him. He could feel its power, its potential. But he also felt a deep sense of responsibility. This was not just a tool. It was a choice. You have unlocked the vault, Silara said, her voice soft with approval. And now you must decide what to do with this power. Will you use it to reshape the galaxy? Or will you protect it, ensuring that no one can misuse its potential? Joran hesitated. The power before him was overwhelming, but he knew that his choice would shape everything. The galaxy, the future, everything. And as he looked at the heart of the Xayarath, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever he decided, it would be up to him to ensure that it was used wisely. I will protect it, Joran said, his voice firm. The power is too dangerous to be controlled. I will ensure that no one can use it for their own gain. Silara nodded, a proud smile crossing her face. You have made the right choice, Joran. The galaxy will be better for it. With that, Joran stepped back, the heart of the Xayarath pulsing softly in his hand. It was a burden, yes, but it was also a promise to protect the future, whatever that future might hold. Joran stood in the heart of the vault, the heart of the Xayarath pulsing softly in his hands. The soft glow from the sphere illuminated his face, casting long shadows across the walls. He could feel its power, the weight of the responsibility it carried. He had made the choice to protect it, to ensure that no one would use it for their own desires. But now he was faced with the reality of what that choice meant. He had taken on a burden, one that might never be fully understood by others. Silara stood beside him, watching him carefully. She had known that the decision would not be easy, but she was proud of his choice. You have chosen well, Joran, she said softly. But now, the true journey begins. Joran looked up at her, a sense of quiet determination in his eyes. What do I do now? I can't just leave this power sitting here. Someone will come after it. Silara nodded. That is true. The Xayarath Dominion will not rest until they have what you hold. They will stop at nothing to possess the heart. But you cannot let them take it. You must ensure that it remains hidden, safe from those who would misuse it. Joran felt a surge of anxiety. How could he keep something so powerful hidden from a galaxy it was constantly watching, constantly in search of new ways to gain an advantage? His hands tightened around the sphere. It seemed almost too small, too simple, to hold such dangerous potential. Yet its presence felt like an anchor, grounding him in this moment, reminding him of the weight of his decision. I can't do it alone, Joran said, his voice filled with uncertainty. I need help. Silara smiled, her golden eyes reflecting the soft glow of the heart. You are not alone, Joran. You have already proven that you have allies. The Xayarath, while powerful, are not invincible. And the galaxy is not as divided as it seems. There are those who will support you, who will stand with you. Joran took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. He had come a long way, but the road ahead would be even harder. There would be battles, sacrifices, and losses. He was no longer the man who had set out on this journey to escape his past. He was someone different now, someone who had made a choice not for himself, but for the future of the galaxy. Where do I go from here? He asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that still swirled within him. First, you must go to the Xayarath's capital, Silara said. There is an ancient stronghold hidden there, a place that even the Xayarath do not fully understand. It was created long before their empire rose to power. If you can find it, you may discover the key to keeping the heart safe. But be warned, the journey will be dangerous. The Xayarath are already searching for you, and they will not be kind. Joran nodded, his mind already working through the logistics of the journey. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing had ever been easy for him. He had faced impossible odds before, and he would face them again. This time, however, he wasn't just fighting for his own survival. He was fighting for the future of everyone in the galaxy. The weight of that responsibility was heavy, but it gave him a sense of purpose that he had never known before. What happens if I can't find the stronghold? Joran asked, his voice low. Silara's expression grew serious. Then the galaxy may fall into darkness. The Sci-Fi Dominion will use the heart's power to reshape the galaxy in their image, and there will be no stopping them. But you are not without hope. You have the strength, the will, and the wisdom to do what is necessary. Joran nodded again, his resolve hardening. He had no choice but to succeed. There was no room for failure, not when so many depended on him. The first step was to leave the vault, to venture back into the galaxy that was waiting for him. He couldn't stay in this place forever. The heart of the Xayarath had to be kept safe, hidden from those who would use it for their own gain. But he would not carry it alone. He would gather allies, people who understood the stakes and who were willing to fight alongside him. As he turned to leave the vault, Silara stopped him. "Joran," she said, her voice soft but filled with meaning. "You have grown. You have become the person you were meant to be. And now you will lead the way." Joran looked back at her, a sense of gratitude filling him. She had been his guide, his mentor through the trials. But now, the path forward was his to choose. The weight of the responsibility was his, but so was the power to shape the future. With one last look at the vault, Joran stepped into the unknown. The galaxy awaited, its fate hanging in the balance. But no matter what challenges lay ahead, he was ready. He had made the right choice. He would protect the heart of the Xayarath, no matter the cost. The journey was far from over, but Joran knew one thing for certain: he would not fail.